if you know rugby history, if you know rugby culture, if you know rugby community, then you'll probably have an idea of the connection between Springbok rugby and All Black rugby, the historic connection that has been passed on from generation to generation, and where the longevity of the interactions, the respect from what's happened on the field and therefore what goes throughout life, even the number of individuals in a New Zealand context that come to our land out of the Republic, means that there is an understanding, let's just say that. And in my own world, South Africa's been in quite a significant context in my own media interactions, and has been a font and a fount of engagement which I've appreciated. And so there is a positive soft spot in my world, even as on the field there is such a desire to beat the Boks. And so I take an interest in what's happening. There's an engagement through social media, through personal relationships, and they're obviously one of the main nations in the world of rugby. They won the World Cup in 2019, defending world champions, as we like to say, not just defending Rugby World Cup champions. And so when they named their 33 men, when they required that they bow the knee before the kingdom of Rasi, who was named and who wasn't named was rather significant. In fact, it was a little bit shocking, actually. And so this video is aptly titled, are the Springbok chances at Rugby World Cup 2023 French toast now that Lud, Pollard and Arm are missing out, haven't been named because of injury? Because that's a pretty significant collection of experienced names. And I think my own opinion is that Diaga is probably easier to be replaced than Andre Pollard and Locanio Arm. Now I have a really short answer. My answer here is, can they win the Rugby World Cup? Can be glass half empty or glass half full. The half empty answer only requires one word. Kind of doesn't make for a very good video, and we're still weeks away from the Rugby World Cup, and things can transpire, which mean that what you easily expect can be nuanced based on a number of factors. So in this video, as I drive throughout my homeland, I want to try and paint a picture as a Kiwi, as an All Black tragic, of why the South African Springboks can still win the Rugby World Cup, even though they're missing two vital cogs, not only in 2019, but who would be in 2023. And for the following reasons. South Africa, of all nations, I think knows how to play tournament rugby. They understand the dynamics. South Africans, if they want to win a debate, or try and win a debate, or enforce their opinion in a debate, they want to identify the fact that they've won 3 Rugby World Cups, and yet they haven't been in every Rugby World Cup, which means their success rate is most proficient. They have a game plan and a style that makes knockout rugby easier to interface or intersect with their own 80 minutes of play. They're less prone to breakdown, and that means guys like Pollard and Arm are really secondary to how Springbok rugby wants to play. And I spoke previously about Aaron Smith, excuse me, being the All Blacks' most important player. And maybe this means Faf de Klerk and his role in the Springbok team rises and needs to elevate to something like an Antoine Dupont for France, where he becomes, if you like, the fulcrum for everything that takes place. And so the All Blacks' greatest opponent in history, their chances aren't dead and buried, because if the forward pack for South African rugby, if the halfback or scrum half for the Springboks can get their game to such a place where they can dominate the opposition, their bomb squad can come on and can perform, then they can potentially manipulate the game plan and control the performance so that the influence of Pollard and Arm isn't as devastating and significant as it seems from the outside and at this point. It's very easy to underestimate what's required to win knockout rugby. This unit understand that. They've completed that type of performance, and this assumes that the other nations of the rugby world whom they will go against won't be put in a similar position. If we look at the All Blacks in 2011 and how many number 10s and or fly halves or first 5/8s they lost, and how they were able to cover, yes, at home, and that no doubt assisted, but we just don't know what's going to transpire. And so another encouragement for the Springboks can be, you don't know what's going to transpire in this World Cup. I think 2019 was a pretty sympathetic draw after the opening match, and that assisted. Now the draw may not be sympathetic this time, however other things may transpire. So counting one's chickens before they're hatched, to quote a cliche, is going beyond this moment in time. And we know what can happen. We know a refereeing decision. We know that red cards are likely to play a part, if not a significant part, in this Rugby World Cup. And therefore, as I'm about to turn the corner, it's a bit bumpy in here, red cards could be that turning point where a player loses his head in the early moments, and that provides the opportunity. So you may be thinking, well, you're trying to scrabble together an answer here to make the South Africans feel better or feel more positive. Well, that's also underestimating the ability of guys like Mane Lebok or Damien Willemse, maybe Jesse Creel in the midfield, and what they can offer. However, if I'm perfectly, entirely honest, the knee-jerk response is to say the Springbok chances at this World Cup have dipped significantly. You wouldn't want to be in their position. I think back to 2015, and I'm not necessarily suggesting these players are of the calibre of Dan Carter and Conrad Smith. However, the significance to the Springboks of Andre Pollard and Lukhanyo Am, I think, is reasonably in that ballpark, and the impact that that would have. So the Springboks have time to potentially turn it round, to potentially put something together to try and fill that void. Well, the talk is Mane Lebok is the man. Concern for me, I've only watched him once really, but it looked like he had quite a small sweet spot in his kicking routine. Now, if he can find that consistently, that's not an issue. But he blocks him out to the right, and then on one I noticed, sometimes Richie Mo'unga can have this, is when he kicked straight, it hooked. which means that sweet spot, there's not too much sympathy, and when he hits the ball, when he hits the rugby ball, excuse me, it needs to be, you know, reasonably consistent, and that can happen. And I think his reputation is reasonably solid there. So again, I haven't seen much of Lebok. If you go with someone like Damian Willemse and Vele, then you potentially got a 10-15 that can be a 10-15 and vice versa. And if you have a forward pack that can dominate, then they can maybe unleash the back line. What do you think? Are the Springbok chances French toast now that these two individuals are out? Or is this a cunning plan? Is this racy? It is radical, it is curious, it is devious best? Is this really lights on the stand and Ravi's taking us all on a journey that will mean closer to the time then these guys will come in? Maybe they won't play in the group stages, but when it comes to knockout time, will they, you know, somehow be able to be reintroduced? Maybe that will take place. They're part of the wider training squad, so the potential is there, but it's certainly not what the Springboks would want to be. It's not where they'd want to be, and I wouldn't want my own nation to have to deal with those two individuals and the parts they play and have those removed, and therefore think that everything following can somehow flow with the same motion and with the same action and with the same effect. There is going to be an effect, and it's up to Rasi and Ninaba and the collaboration of the Springbok coaches, their playing nous and understanding of the game intellect, and try and really bring the best out of who they have left and play a game that can probably minimise the chances for the opposition, but also minimise breakdowns in their own game in light of maybe the limitations of the players they have. But it can happen. It can definitely happen. And if any team in World Rugby know how to make that happen, it's the Springboks. The big question is, will they? And it's an impossible question to answer at this stage. It's impossible to be able to say whether or not they will. If you want my perfect answer, is I am more on the side of doubting that. Not because they haven't got some talented players in their squad, but just because when it's really going to count, and if they do make the knockouts, then those differences in the players that are trying to fill the spot, the pressure, those minute headline cracks will begin to be placed under a lot of stress, and the chances of them widening and opening, I think, are pretty significant. And I think they easily become targets for the opposition. And so, an opportunity. Cometh the opportunity, cometh the man. And there are fewer nations in the world that will celebrate those players like Lebok or Willemse or whomever, with such exuberance than the Rainbow Nation. It's going to be fascinating to watch. Fascinating to see that contest between the Springboks and Ireland. To view whoever is in the pivot versus, assuming he's fit, Johnny Sexton, to see how it outworks itself in real time. That's all to come. Do you think the Springboks are French toast? Do you think it's all over? Or do you give them a chance? If it was a 5 out of 10 chance, 7 out of 10 chance, what is it now? Who would you put in those positions to cover or to replace Pollard and Arm? I'll be interested to read what you have to say. Keep the faith, South Africa. Stranger things have happened on a rugby field. As an All Black supporter, I guess you're probably not too surprised that if we do meet in the final, I think it's about time for the All Blacks nation to repay the favour of a previous Rugby World Cup. We'll talk about that maybe at another time. Like, share and subscribe. Thanks for listening and enjoying the long and bumpy roads of Middle New Zealand.